Today is March 30th, 2021, and the Hypixel admins just released update 0.11.3 for Hypixel Skyblock. This update is huge as it has not only released the master mode for dungeons, but it has also rebalanced the dungeon classes, changed a number of items, and changed some core game mechanics that have been around since the game released. Today, I am going to be trying to make as much of this update clear for you as I can. I am not going to be covering Master Mode because I still don't know a ton about it, and we are still trying to figure out the best ways to complete it. However, I am going to be going over the fundamental game mechanic changes, the changes to class balance and design, and a number of item changes, so if you are confused and you want to learn more, stick around till the end. I'm going to be breaking down this video into sections that are seen in the patch notes, so if you want to jump ahead, there are links to timestamps in the description below, along with the entirety of the patch notes. Before we get too far into this video, I want to thank you all for the incredible amount of support I've had on my channel recently. It really does mean a lot. And to those of you who haven't subscribed, I hope to see you subscribe. It is free and you can always change your mind later. Let's get right into the video. The first section is quality of life changes, and most of these are pretty small. Other than some small changes to the GUI, the largest change that is seen here is the amount of Catacombs XP that you get over time. As you complete more of the same floor, it gives you a larger and larger buff to the amount of XP that you get per run, up to an 150% buff. Meaning that once you've maxed out this perk, you will be getting 2.5 times as much XP as you would normally get. I think that this is a pretty substantial change, because not only does it make leveling cata faster once you are higher cata, it also increases the amount of XP that you get from lower floors compared to higher floors. This means that doing floors other than 7 will be much more viable in the long run. Now, onto the class balance changes, and I think this is one of the biggest changes that has been introduced to the game in a long time. Ever since Floor 7 released, the meta for dungeons has basically been 4 mages and maybe an archer if you have a more wealthy archer. But most of the time, this archer would just be half a mage, and this was mostly due to the class passives of the other classes being pretty useless. Also, most of the time you didn't really need a tank or a healer, because there was nothing that would come close to killing you if you were competent and had high enough cata. However, because of the lifesteal changes that we'll be covering later, it is significantly more difficult to stay alive in Floor 7 without a healer or a tank. As far as I know, tanks and healers are also very important for Master Mode, especially Master Mode 5. However, I really don't know a ton about this, and I'm not going to pretend that I do. The 3 classes that got buffed were Tank, Healer, and Berserker, which makes a lot of sense because Mage was just so unbelievably oppressive to the meta, and these were all buffed in different ways. Tank got a new passive ability, and its ultimate was changed. Healer got 2 new passive abilities, and Berserker got a new passive ability, which we'll be talking about now. Tank's new passive ability is quite powerful, and it's called Absorb, and it basically redirects a significant amount of damage that your teammates take to you. This means that if you are spec'd entirely for EHP and for true defense, you will be taking most of the brunt of the damage for your team. However, this also does mean that as a tank, if you aren't spec'd properly, you have a very good chance of dying because you will be taking sometimes 4 or 5 times as much damage as you'd normally be. Furthermore, the tank ultimate was changed and it now reduces incoming damage by 70%, and as far as I know, that also applies to the damage that you're taking from your teammates, meaning that during a boss fight or during a particularly intensive part of dungeons, you will be taking a lot of damage from your teammates and reducing a significant portion of it. The next class that was buffed was Healer, and it was changed a lot, and I mean a lot. The first thing that was changed is it now has the ability to click on a teammate, applying a tether to them. This tether will heal your teammate over time, and as you attack mobs, it will heal both of you further. This is very powerful in boss fights, especially for Master Mode. Healer was also given a perk which, when you kill mobs, drops different items on the ground which can be picked up to give temporary buffs to your teammates. There are 3 of them, one that heals, one that deals damage, and one that increases defense. All of these are quite powerful and buff the healer class in a very, very needed way. Finally, the Berserk class was buffed because as you deal consecutive hits to the same mob, it increases your damage and it can go up to a ton. This means that in Floor 7, Berserkers can now shred Necron, especially in Phase 4. The next of these changes that we are going to be looking at is changes to 4 different pets. The first is a slight buff to Skeleton Pet, a pretty strong nerf to Tiger Pet, a very strong buff to Lion Pet, and a slight buff to Spirit Pet. The changes made to the Skeleton Pet weren't really that huge. What it did do is it buffed the Skeletal Defense perk, which deals some amount of your crit damage towards an enemy, what used to be every 15 seconds and now is every 5 seconds. In theory, to balance this, they also decreased the amount of damage that it deals per hit to 60 times your crit damage down to 30 times your crit damage. This change really isn't huge, and it doesn't make the Skeleton Pet massively viable, but I guess it is cool to see some of the less used pets in the game buffed a little bit. This next change is a pretty substantial nerf to the Tiger Pet, and through that, a nerf to almost all ferocity items in the game. What they did is they increased the base ferocity of the tiger, however they decreased the amount of buffed ferocity that it gets to everything. It used to double all of your ferocity and now it only increases it by 50%. While this might not seem like a ton, it is actually pretty substantial because it means that all items that you would use a tiger pet with have been nerfed by a hefty amount. Although this doesn't really affect me a ton, as the only thing I use a tiger pet for are for powder ghasts, it will affect some players, and it means that in my opinion, a Valkyrie is a substantially less useful item, and this nerf to ferocity isn't even the end of it, which I will get into in a little bit. The third of these pet changes is by far the largest, and it buffs the lion pet from being one of the worst pets in the game to being one of the best pets in the game. The new lion pet increases the effectiveness of first and triple strike by 100%, meaning that on your first hit, you would normally get an 100% damage increase from first strike. Now you get a 200% damage increase from first strike, which is very, very large, especially for your first hit. I think that the lion pet buff is a pretty reasonable one. I think they might have taken it a little bit too far, but it is cool to see a normally very unused pet go to being a very, very powerful one. The final change to pets was made to the spirit pet, and it makes it go from entirely useless to mostly useless. Now it works even while you don't have it equipped, which means it's more similar to the grandma wolf now. And it sort of fixes the annoying bug, which was that when you died with a spirit pet in your pets menu, it wouldn't re-equip when you came back to life. In my opinion, this is also a valid buff. However, it really doesn't do a ton for the pet's viability. Now it's just something nice to have in your pet's menu. This next group of changes all sort of falls into the exact same category, however it is a massive change to the way that boss fights happen in the game. A lot of boss fights, just because of how much power creep has happened over time, sort of just ended as soon as they started. It would be that somebody would summon a dragon and then it would either be gone in a few seconds, or you'd have a bunch of nons fighting to get as much damage as they could. However, this change sort of changes it up. According to the patch notes itself, this update is supposed to make boss fights more engaging for all players, so that endgame and early game players can fight side by side. What this change does is it sort of adds a scaling damage cap. Now, at some point, you will be hard capped on the amount of damage that you can deal, and that cap is at 1% of the mob's health. I know that this doesn't sound like a lot for some people, however, to get to that 1% cap, you have to be dealing pretty absurd amounts of damage. The numbers are broken down in the post themselves, and I will show them on screen now. However, I don't really want to go into detail on a bunch of it, because it is a little bit annoying to explain. I would recommend just go try it out. It is still pretty fun to do dragon fights in my opinion, however you aren't going to get things like immediate one-taps. This change was not just added to dragons, as now this applies to arachne bosses, magma bosses, dragons, protectors, and horsemen? I don't really know who grinds out horsemen, but you know, good for you. These next changes are to dungeons, and although they aren't super complicated, they are very, very important to the way that the game is played, especially early on. It used to be that once you could be carried through all the floors and you could buy your carries, that was it. You would be done and you could use all the items that you wanted. However, now there are very, very big changes. First is it requires combat 15 to join entrance, while it used to be combat 5. Now this is the highest requirement as a combat level to go somewhere. It used to be the end at combat 12, but now it is combat 15. This continues to scale, however it is not with combat levels, and now it is with catacombs. What this basically means is you have to do enough entrance runs to get to cata 1, and then you have to do enough floor 1s to get to cata 3 to do floor 2, and then 5, and then 9, 14, 19, and 24. You will no longer just be able to be carried all the way up through floor 7 and then use whatever items you want. You're actually going to have to grind out the catacombs levels to get the completions. I would have said that you should do this a little while back, however it is too late now. You sort of just have to grind up and play as it's sort of intended to be played. This also applies to items that are dropped in those floors. They all have those same cata level requirements. However, it is important to note that boss loot only has a floor completion requirement. This means that currently, if you are under Catacombs level 24, but you already have a floor 7 completion, you will be able to use your Hyperion. However, in the future, if you even want to get that floor 7 completion, you are going to have Cata 24. This is a very healthy change for the game in my opinion, as it means that you actually have to grind through the levels. Although this last section seems like it's the smallest part, it is actually one of the most fundamental changes that has happened to the game since the very beginning. And that is a change to the lifesteal and siphon enchants. Especially recently, there was never a problem with dying in this game unless you literally just got one-tapped, and that was because as long as you were dealing consistent damage, you would lifesteal through basically anything. One hit of lifesteal with good gear would fully heal you back to 2,000 or 3,000 health. Now that is changed entirely. To quickly demonstrate how the changes to lifesteal have impacted things like ghost farming, I'm going to be demonstrating a little bit of that. Today I am going to be using my maxed out Soul Whip and some pretty good Necron armor, along with a Mithril Golem. Because of the changes to the way that lifesteal and vampirism interact, I think that a Mithril Golem is much better than a wolf now, because it is much nicer if you are able to one-tap rather than two-tap. As you can see here, I have taken a decent bit of damage from the ghosts. However, just like before, I am able to naturally regenerate it. None of this has changed, however, what you're going to see here is the big difference. Normally, if I hit one Soul Whip hit, I basically immediately regen to full. However, now, I don't get that healing until I start killing the mobs. But when I start killing the mobs, I am basically immediately back to full. For a good player who is either 2 or 1 tapping, this really isn't going to be much of a change. However, if you see somebody like this, he is having a pretty difficult time sustaining them, because he's not getting the same lifesteal that he used to. If I now use my Mithril Golem, and I am 1 tapping everything, it is extremely easy. You have to almost try to die, just like it was before. To quickly recap the highlights of this update, first, the amount of Catacombs XP you are going to get for lower floors will be more. Next, the balance of the classes will be much better, and it will likely be that other classes than Mage and Archer will be significantly more viable. Next is that lifesteal has been vastly nerfed, and the game is much more reliant on healing items now and killing mobs rather than just dealing damage to them. Boss fights have been significantly changed in a way that makes them more skill dependent rather than gear dependent. Finally, ferocity has been nerfed pretty significantly to a point where I would not consider werewolf to be a good mid-game set anymore, and I think that tiger pet has fallen out of the S tier. If you you managed to make it all the way to the end of this video, I really do appreciate you. I know it is a very long and complicated update, and I would probably agree. It took me a while myself to figure out everything that is going on, and I didn't even look at Master Mode. If you have more questions and you want to ask other people that are similarly minded about them, go down and join my Discord, link is in the description. There are going to be a lot of changes coming to Hypixel Skyblock throughout the following days and weeks, and in my opinion, most of it is for the better. I do want to see you throughout all of it, so if you want to see more of me, go down and subscribe and turn on notifications. Thank you all very, very much for watching, and adios.